So our next amazing speaker is Aragsan Rayaleh. And Aragsan lives in London and is a stay-at-home mother to 4 children. She has 2 sons who are type 1 diabetic that were diagnosed as babies. Please welcome Aragsan.
Hi everyone, I'm very happy to be given the opportunity to come up here and be a speaker and talk about my experience as a parent to 2 children that got diagnosed really early on. So back in April 2015, my then 1-year-old, and I had a 2-month-old by the way, just before, he was showing signs and he was peeing through his nappy. He was constantly asking for milk, and he was prior to that, he was a very calm child. And I noticed a change in his behavior as well. He was getting really upset easily, crying all the time, and I was just like, what's going on, you know? And it came to a point where I actually took him into bed with me, and his nappy seeped through and actually went onto me. I had a feeling that he was type 1 diabetic because their dad's type 1 diabetic, so I was aware of the signs, but I didn't expect it to happen so soon, or that it was going to happen at all. So it happened to be a Sunday, and he just wouldn't stop crying, and he was showing signs of having a cold. So what I did, I took him into the urgent...
Excuse me, can we please get a microphone for the speaker, please?
Sorry. I don't know, can you guys hear me well? Yeah. Okay, sorry. Thank you. So I took him into the urgent care centre as it was a Sunday, and after about 2.5-hour wait, I saw a doctor, and I explained to her, and I said, look, his dad's type 1 diabetic, he's peeing a lot, he's drinking a lot, he's not himself. Can you see what's wrong with him? She refused and said, I am not going to prick him because it's not necessary. And I don't want to put him under that pain. And I was like, well, his dad's diabetic, he's got that paternal link, and I'm concerned. And she said, sorry, I'm not going to do that. And she gave me a prescription of paracetamol and ibuprofen, told me to go home. As soon as that happened, I went home and I packed his stuff. I was like, no, I know something's not right. And I took him straight to Royal Free Hospital that same evening, and I told them what happened. As soon as I got through to the A&E and I said, these are my concerns, they immediately pricked him and confirmed my suspicions. His sugars were 18 at the time. As soon as that happened, I was very fortunate that a friend who I used to go to school with was actually working as a paediatric nurse. So she said to me, Aragsan, please try and get him transferred over to UCLH immediately. And I spoke to the doctors and I said, this is my request as a mother. I would like him to go straight over to UCLH and have his care transferred over there before he started anything, you know, any form of treatment or anything at all. It was a difficult time because in 2 days' time, I was going through an eviction. So the landlord was actually selling the property, and I'd been living there for 6 years, and said she was just selling it. It was no fault of our own or anything like that. And I was just like, couldn't be any worse of a timing. I've got a few pictures here of, this is actually in UCLH. So the following day, he got transferred over. And what happened was he was given insulin immediately, like a half a unit of Novorapid. And what happened was his blood sugars plummeted a bit too much. So straightforward from that moment, they decided, you know what, he's gonna have to go on a pump because he's only a baby and that half a unit is way too strong for him. So in the middle of having to go through pump training, going back and forth to the house, in the shock of a diagnosis, like I felt like my heart was just sinking. I just wasn't in the right frame of mind, especially the fact that I had a baby. I was also breastfeeding, and I have an older son at the time who's in school full time. My perception of type 1 diabetes at that moment in time wasn't the greatest because their dad's condition wasn't very well controlled. All I saw was numerous amount of severe hypos, the glucagon injection being administered. I just looked at it as if it was a death sentence. So while I was going through the whole pump training, and the good thing was that I have a background in pharmaceutical science, so that's what I did for my degree. So I was able to get and gain the information and actually retain it really quickly and have a better understanding of this condition. So on the Wednesday, it was the day before he started pumping, and that was the day of my eviction. I had to leave my son in hospital and go straight to the local authority because we had nowhere to go. I told them that, you know, this is the situation, my son's in hospital, and they showed no compassion. They said, why don't you just get him transferred over? You know, you guys are gonna have to move out of London. I said, he's a baby. You can't just expect me to move a baby. He's just been diagnosed. I said, this is a really stressful time for us. And they placed us in a hostel within London, so I was quite fortunate. But it wasn't the best environment because we were placed around people who had a lot of struggles going on, and it wasn't an environment for a mother with kids. So going back and forth to the hospital, the training, he probably spent about 3 weeks in hospital before he was discharged, because our concern and our consultant's concern was that, you know, as I'm learning about this condition, how am I going to manage it in a hostel? I wasn't allowed to make any food. We had a cooking facility in the room that I was in, but apparently no one was allowed to use the cooking facility, so that made it even harder for me, because I was like, how am I going to cook? Luckily, my family are around, so every single day I'd be at hospital, the house, cooking, coming back, reheating meals, as well as trying to gain information about this condition, how I can manage it. Okay. As you know, sleep deprivation. I thought that having a baby was the difficult part, but no. It was actually, when I look back at it, I'm like, I can have a newborn baby any day. But so I'd get up every hour to 2 hours. I had alarms on my phone when he came out of hospital, because I was just so worried. I was just like, I don't want nothing happening to him. He's a baby, he can't communicate with me. This is all new to me, having to do set changes as well. And I did not sleep at all. I'd be awake pretty much the whole night. I think the first 3 nights of him being at home, I couldn't sleep properly because his carb ratios needed to be adjusted pretty much all the time because he was newly diagnosed, and his basal rates as well. I found that with him, his requirements were quite high for a baby of his age. Okay, sorry. And luckily, after about a year, we did get homed. So during that period of time, we moved 4 times to 4 different hostels throughout London, as well as, you know, I felt like if I could separate myself into different segments, and one so that I could be active for my older child, one to be there for my child that got diagnosed, and be there for baby, I would do that and cut myself to pieces and just give them. And I couldn't. I just felt so down, as I was unable to feel like I could be present for any of my children, because I was so fixated on making sure that he was okay. So when we did finally get a place, which was the following year in March 2016, the following month, my sister stayed over with me. She's over here with us, and she's been amazing support. She randomly tested a younger one, and he was 1, and his blood readings were 9. When I saw that, I knew what was going to happen. I knew that a diagnosis was going to happen, because I knew that a reading of 9 wasn't okay for a child of 1 year old. So what I did, luckily, my other son, he had an appointment at the hospital, so I presented that to Dr. Peters, and I said, look, this is the readings we're getting. What can we do? Obviously, it was still below the threshold to be diagnosed, so she said, okay, we'll put him in a CGM, monitor him for a week, come back, and we'll upload the readings. So what we found was that his readings were climbing up, but they would come back down on his own, so they weren't enough to say he can be confirmed type 1 diabetic, and enough to put him on insulin. So we gave it about 3 months before he actually got his diagnosis in the summer. But during that time, every time I'd cook and feed him, I kept thinking, is this the last time that I can feed my child without having to worry about testing and, you know, giving him insulin? And then when the diagnosis did happen, it was still a very early diagnosis, but he did need to be put on insulin. So on the night, again, it was a weekend, so I took him into the hospital to the A&E in UCLH, and the doctor that was on call, she said she wanted to give him an injection of half a unit of insulin. I refused. I said no, because I remember what happened with my son Jabril. I was like, there's no way that you're going to give him. I'm going to wait until he's seen by, you know, the specialists, and then we'll go forward. And I said, look, after 6 hours, if his sugars have not come down, I'll give you the go-ahead to give him insulin. But please, can we just see how his sugars behave overnight? Because I know at night time it can be very sensitive. And fortunately, by the morning, his sugars were back to normal. So we had an appointment on Monday, and as obviously it's not my first time having to deal with this condition, we were given the pump, and we were like, you know what you're doing. So we set up his rates, and he started pumping immediately. The difference between him and his older brother was that because he was diagnosed so early, he was still going through the honeymoon phase, and which meant was his requirements were a lot less than what his brother's was. So I had to disconnect his cannula at night and leave it running. And then I'd have to remember to connect it again first thing in the morning in time for his breakfast. So he was only pretty much needing insulin for meals. So he didn't really have much of a basal rate. It was only just about carb ratios at that moment in time. So this continued for about 6 months before he needed background insulin, the basal unit, running throughout the night, and I could disconnect it. And in a way, I felt a bit more relief because I didn't have to remember having to disconnect and connect it all over again. So when that second diagnosis occurred, I would say that I developed major anxiety. I struggled to leave the house. I was scared to leave the house. I didn't want to leave the house. All I kept thinking was, what if they both have a low? It was summertime when the second diagnosis occurred, and obviously with the heat, and I knew, so I pretty much locked myself away. And it wasn't until I only left for necessities, groceries, taking my oldest son to school, and that was it. And then by the time it came to the winter, it's when my family said, listen, you need to get out of the house. And my grandma who lives abroad said, come and visit us. So I was like, okay, you know what, I need to do this. And I drove from London, I drove over to Holland in the car, packed up everything and went, and it was the best thing I ever did because it gave me the confidence and it gave me a realization that I can do it. So getting to the schooling part, when my son Jabril was about to start school, that was when I was like, oh my God, I'm the one that's doing everything. How on earth am I going to trust anyone else to take care of him the way I'm taking care of him? And that's when I found out that I had to get funding for him to have a one-to-one at school during school hours because he was still very little. So I had to apply for the educational healthcare plan and initially got rejected. And they said, well, being type 1 diabetic has no impact on your ability to learn. And so I was just like, of course it does, because if his blood sugars are erratic, he's not going to be able to focus, and this is going to have an impact on his ability to learn and his cognitive development, because he's only still so young. He got diagnosed as a baby, and I'm trying to make sure that his sugars remain in a good range for as long as possible, because I know that I'm totally aware about, with the teenage phase when they start to rebel. So I said, you know what, let me try my best to do my part and make sure that his sugars are in good range and that he's healthy. Luckily, with the help of the hospital, they were able to give me research studies and showing, uncontrolled diabetes, what it can do to you and how it can affect your cognitive development and how you can end up developing learning difficulties and memory loss, etc. So I presented that to local authority, and they couldn't go against that. So he ended up getting the award for the full-time funding during school hours. Then going through the whole training, I spent 3 weeks in hospital. 3 weeks at the school every day, carb counting their meals, taking pictures, and putting a folder together just so that they go by the photos with the help of carbon cows so that he can, have lunch. He didn't want to have a packed lunch. He said he wanted to have school dinners like everybody else. I said, you know what, why not? I'll make sure that happens. And I realized that as a mother, I'm constantly advocating for my children because I feel like, obviously times have really changed, but there's a lot of people who are not educated when it comes to this condition, and they just think, you're fine, just exercise and cut down on the sugar. I'm like, no, there's more to it. Yeah, and if you see, my boys are thriving, they're so happy, they have each other, and what I've installed in them is that I make sure to talk to them about and ask them how they're feeling, and they're happy, they feel special, but if anything, they're so proud they show their pumps to their mates at school, like, I've got this device. And you know what? You tend to neglect yourself as a parent. And I feel like I did neglect myself, and it did take its toll on my health because I was just so fixated on doing everything for my children. Both Jabril now, he's going to be 10, and I've got Yusuf, the younger one, who got diagnosed. He is 8 years old now. And I just had a baby a year ago. She's 1. But what happened was I had a very complicated pregnancy. I had hyperemesis gravidarum, so I could not keep any food down at all. I was constantly vomiting, over 20 hospital admissions, and this was a major challenge for me. I then had to take myself out of that superwoman role and ask for help and get my family, my partner, everybody to kick in and look after the kids because I could not do it. I was dosed up on antiemetics. I couldn't do anything at all, and I actually felt like a failure. But then my family would tell me, look, you're allowed to be unwell. It's fine. We're here for you. And what it did teach me was that if you're not looking after yourself, how you can look after your kids? Your number one priority should be yourself. because if you're not well, your children are going to have an impact as well. It was so hard for me to accept help and allow family members to step in and take care of the kids. And it did take an impact on my mental health. But then when I look back at it now, what it's done to me is that I'm so much more relaxed with the kids. I'm not so glued onto them. I allow other people to come in and take control and be present in their lives without me having to be scouring over them. They now have the level of independence where during the pregnancy, it's been such a positive thing for them, where they're now looking at their readings, and I'm now having to, when I make the meals, tell them, look, Jabril, give yourself 35 grams of carbs. Okay, Mum. Same thing with the younger one. And yeah, so at one point there were 2 different pumps. So the older one got put on the 780G, and that has been a game changer, absolutely amazing. And the younger one didn't get put on the 780G until about a week before my induction. I actually had to get induced because of how complicated my pregnancy was. When that happened, all I kept on thinking about was like, yes, he's going to be on the smart guard. I don't have to worry about him when I'm in hospital. But your worries never end, because I remember first thing in the morning before having to go to the hospital, I was doing set changes, changing the sensors. I was just like, I just wanted to make sure that everything was okay and there was no blockage, there was no malfunction, changing the batteries. I had to make sure everything was absolutely fine so that I can focus on myself. They don't have a restricted diet. They're able to eat anything they want to eat. You know, obviously, if their readings are a bit higher, they're going to have to wait for it to drop. But with the change in technology, I can't get over how, even in the space from 2015 up until this present day, they first were on the 640G with no sensors. And then after that, when the second diagnosis occurred, not long after is when they both went on the sensors. So I, at one point, had 2 children with no sensors, and I was just constantly testing them. And the sensors did give us a big flexibility, and it gave me a bit more confidence to start doing things with them as well. But the 780G, the difference it made to our lives, I can't even comprehend. The nighttime blood sugars. I cannot believe how well the Smart Guard works. Even when they're starting to plummet, it will suspend and the blood sugars will start to rise, so I'm able to get a better sleep. And it's just made a difference. And even them, they'll be like, you know what, Mum, I love this pump. It's so amazing. And I love that they have each other to talk to, and they're not afraid about their condition. If anyone was to ask them, you know, what's this around your pump? They will explain, say, I'm type 1 diabetic, I need insulin, and this is what it is. None of this would have occurred if it wasn't for the amazing care that they're under at UCLH. Dr. Catherine Peters is amazing. Honestly, like, I can't imagine, like, I still get nervous. Every 3 months when we're meant to go to the appointment, I'm like, oh my God, I wonder what the HbA1c is. I'm so scared. But as soon as I walk through, she's like, Aragsan, calm down, it's absolutely fine. You're doing so great. Like, she's always constantly praising me. And even usually with kids, you know, they don't like hospitals. Usually children do not like to go to hospitals. But my sons, they will ask me at least once a month and say, Mum, when are we going to go see the doctor? We want to go, you know? When can we go? Because there's the excitement of just having to, like, you know, put their finger prick in the machine and check and see the HbA1c level. And my younger one, he's just constantly running around. He's so hyperactive, but he's so happy. I have very high hopes and dreams for my children, and I always tell my sons that they're able to achieve anything they set their mind to, and that having this condition will not stop them from doing so. As a mother, I always advocate for my sons and try my best to make sure that they're in a good state, that it doesn't affect their mental health. This wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for the care that they get from the hospital. Also, the nurses have been incredibly amazing. Whenever I need to call up for any support regarding schooling, illnesses, they're straight to the point and they get back to me immediately, and I just don't feel alone anymore. Also, I would like to thank Ross as well, because I was so nervous coming up here today. I was worried that I didn't want it to sound negative. I also wanted everyone to feel positive, and I wanted my story to connect with everybody else. And I wanted other parents to see that they're also not alone, and things do improve, it gets better, technology's advancing, the children are absolutely fine. You know, so this is real life, and I hope you guys enjoyed listening to our story.